Welcome to the Long Thread podcast about spinning, stitching, and weaving by hand. The podcast is presented by Long Thread Media, publishers of Spin-Off, Handwoven, Piecework, and Little Looms magazines. Find us online at longthreadmedia.com. Trinway Silks is where weavers, spinners, knitters, and stitchers find the silk they love. Select from the largest variety of silk spinning fibers, silk yarn, and silk threads and ribbons at trinwaysilks.com. You'll discover a rainbow of colors thoughtfully hand-dyed in Colorado. Love natural? Trinway's array of wild silks provide choices beyond white. If you love silk, you'll love Trinway Silks, where superior quality and customer service are guaranteed.
Hi, I'm Susan Bateman, and I started the Yarn Barn back in 1971. Since the beginning, it's been important to us to teach the crafts we love: weaving, knitting, crochet, and spinning. Last year, we had nearly 1,000 enrollments in our classes. We answered questions in-store, by phone, and through email. When you order from the Yarn Barn of Kansas, you aren't just ordering materials, you're supporting a business that can support you when you need help. See us at yarnbarn-ks.com.
I'm your host, Long Thread Media co-founder Ann Merrow. Robin Lynde is the owner of Meridian Jacobs, a fiber farm in Northern California, and a hand weaver. Thanks so much for being here, Robin.
Well, you're welcome. I look forward to it.
So we only do an audio podcast, but if I was ever tempted to do a video podcast, it would be to ask you to show me some of the adorable Jacob sheep you have at Meridian Jacobs. Can you tell me about your sheep?
Yes, the Jacob sheep are the most obvious things to people looking in are that they have horns and they have spots, and everybody thinks they're goats. Even after they come to visit a sheep farm, they still start talking about the goats. Nope, they're sheep. And they have the spotted wool and the horns. They can have 2 horns or 4 horns. And everybody says, oh, or 6. Well, sometimes they have a couple of extra horns, but they don't really have room on their head for really nice big horns if they have 6, but there can be little shorter ones. So they are considered a primitive breed. Primitive, there's different words: primitive, classic, heritage, whatever word you want to use to indicate a breed of animal or plant that hasn't been bred for maximizing some other quality. Like, oh, we want all white wool, or we want all really even wool, or we want lots of meat. In England, where our Jacob sheep came from, they have changed a bit. They're a little stockier. They're not as interested in the fleece. The breed registry started in, now I forget. I'd have to look it up. Late 80s, I think. And it was to describe the American Jacob, or the Jacob the way it was when it got here in the 1900s. Which sounds like a really long time ago, except some of us were born in the 1900s. So, not that far back. And I can keep talking, but maybe
please do. No, I love to hear about your sheep.
Okay. Well, anyway, so that's the thing. We do have a breed registry. I'm one of the inspectors, because each sheep that is registered, it's not just by pedigree, it's by a group of inspectors looking digitally now at the sheep and making sure that they really look like there's no reason to suspect crossbreeding, because sometimes people have a sheep that has spots or a sheep that has horns and they go, oh, it's a Jacob sheep, or they don't really care and they crossbreed, but we kind of care about keeping it the way it was. So they're a medium-sized breed. The wool is medium, fine, because of the keeping to the standard. The breed standard lists something like 25 to 35 or 26 to 36 microns is the range of wool, because they were trying to describe what those sheep probably were originally. That's a pretty broad range when you're talking microns. So that's the thing. If we get something on the outside, either direction of that, we're saying, well, then maybe that's not so typical. There's a lot more to that. But the range of fleece, which is why I got into the sheep, because I weave and I like the fiber. And it's really good for everything from sweaters, hats, blankets, a big range of things.
So you started off as I think many people have the dream of doing. You started off as somebody who loved wool and decided that you were going to be a shepherd yourself.
Yeah, I think I started spinning when I was in college and weaving shortly after that. and ended up getting, well, in the mid 80s, we had a dairy and I had a few sheep there, but not more room for more than a few sheep. And then we moved to where we are now in 1999. And a person who other people were familiar with at the time, she did a great event called Fiber Visions. She was moving to Oregon and selling her sheep, her Jacob sheep. And I bought them. And that's when I started raising Jacobs. But it was from a wool, the interest in wool. And they're a cool looking sheep.
Mm-hmm.
And then realistically, if you're going to raise sheep and breed them, you have to have an outlet for all those babies. So, right. I do sell to people that want them for me too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But my interest is really the wool.
Yeah. Well, and one of the interesting traits about sheep with spots is that, I mean, if you want to do anything besides have gray wool, gray yarn, gray fiber, you have to separate it. So they're pretty high touch sheep, I guess, with air quotes. You spend a lot of time with your hands in the fleece, or am I making that up?
No, that's right. When we shear, and we sheared just in January, and when I get around to trying to skirt more fleeces, I have two directions the fleeces go. They're either going to go online to offer for sale, or I do other things to send them to a mill for processing. And when somebody buys a fleece, or the fleece that I may choose to use this year, you have choices. You can separate out all those colors. Well, it's like white and black, but you're not going to get all the black fibers and all the white fibers separated. So there's your gray. Mm-hmm. And you can choose to separate before you do anything. And then you can spin it, keeping the colors distinct, decide to apply two colors or not. Or you can just wash it all and spin it as it comes. So you'll have a variegated yarn. Or if you card it all together, of course, then you'll get more solid gray. And that's just talking fiber. I decide the fleeces that I am going to have made into yarn for weavers and knitters and crocheters, I skirt them, which is to get the bad stuff off around the edge, which there's not very much. And then I sort the colors. Yeah, I sort white and black and the middle part, which is going to be gray. And have to decide. It's really fun to be able to maybe tell the mill, hey, make this a side-by-side roving, or apply white and apply black and get that. But I don't have hundreds and hundreds of pounds to have enough of any one thing to say, oh, I want this lot to be this way and this, that. I need to just say, okay, make black wool, make black yarn, white yarn, gray yarn. And then it's up to the fiber artist to put it together in a piece however they want. Same thing with the roving. Black roving, gray wool roving, white. But then the spinner has the opportunity to blend it or not as they want to. But yes, it's not just like, oh, skirt the fleece, put it in a bag. There's all that other sorting if I want something besides gray, which I do. Well, you can see the sweater.
I can see that you are wearing a lovely...
I can't see it. I did not. One of my farm club members made me this sweater because it's knit.
Oh, wow.
I don't really knit. I don't like to knit. So I'm a weaver. But she made the sweater, yes.
And how many sheep do you have?
Oh, that's always a hard question, but we did just shear. We sheared 77. However, 20 of those were my neighbor's sheep we bring her sheep, her Jacob sheep here for shearing day because she doesn't use the wool. So that means I had about 57 or so. Roughly 60 is how it usually is, but we will lamb starting in March, and there'll be more.
That is not a whole lot of sheep, but I guess if you have sheep that have 2 to 4 horns each, that's 2 to 4 times as many horns as sheep. Do you find it difficult to work on animals that have horns?
No, in fact, I find I have 2 sheep right now that do not have horns because I had a BFL ram, and every so often I'll have a BFL crossbreed some of them because I get market lambs. They're bigger. That's another line, another story. Those sheep are bigger. They don't have horns. And it's almost like when you go to hold a sheep by its head, you put you put one hand under the jaw, one hand behind the ears. And it's not like you hold on to the horns because you don't. They'll fight you. They don't like to be just grabbed by the horns, but those horns are there that kind of keep your hand in place. And those sheep that don't have horns, I mean, they just slither out through your hand. Or picture this, the way I can control my sheep a lot of times, because they aren't huge. They're not 300 pounds. I'm talking the ewes. They're, 120, say. But if I'm straddling one, I have the head between my legs, because then I can pull out a syringe or I can, do whatever I'm doing. Those horns are helping keep it from sliding out. And those ones that don't have horns, they just slither back between your legs. You can't hold them that way. Hell. But they are used to being handled. There are sheep. I think people ask what breeds are more calm and all of that. And maybe there's something that is breed specific, but I feel like a lot of it is shepherd specific. Mm-hmm. My sheep are used to being, not that they're all pets, because they're not. There's a few, but they're used to having people come around. I have farm club. I have people that come out on field trips. So they're kind of used to people in the barn occasionally and being handled. And so they don't just run to the far side of the field every time they see anybody. The rams are another story. They actually almost get tamer than I'd like to, because I want the rams I'd rather have a ram walk away from me than approach me when I'm out there, because whether it's any sheep, I suppose, but particularly one with big horns, especially towards breeding season, they can just get a little bit more aggressive, and I don't want that. I don't want them to be afraid of me, but I don't want them to be my best friend.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And now a word from our sponsors. Sustainability and regenerative ranching have been a way of life for the ranches of Shaniko Wool Company for decades. They're the first farm group in the U.S. to achieve certification to the rigorous International Responsible Wool Standard and Nativo Regenerative. Shaniko ranches raise merino Rambouillet sheep in the western U.S., delivering a fully traceable wool supply that gives back to the earth and its ecosystems. To learn more and discover Shaniko's yarn partners, visit ShanikoWoolCompany.com. And now back to the show. So you mentioned black and white. There's actually different shades of Jacob, right? There's a brown, there's something called lilac.
Yeah, well, it's either, actually, this is sort of interesting, because one of my colleagues who is been raising Jacob sheep maybe a little longer than me, he's back in Michigan now. And he was associated with UC Davis, though, and he still has colleagues there at UC Davis. They're actually doing a study, kind of not through UC Davis, but through the connections that these past people had, to try to do some genetic markers on what lilac means, because Jacob sheep are either black and white or they're lilac. At least that's when you read about it. And what that means is, and when you look at the sheep, a lot of people think they're brown and white. Well, that's a sun bleached tips. And if you look at pictures, I have them on my website, or when I put, they're in my blog, or when I put fleeces up for sale, you have the cut side and the top side and the cut side, and they look very different, because the sun bleached tips make it look brownish, but it may still be a black fleece. And when you look at the sheep's face, whatever the hair is, that's the color it is. So if it's got black facial markings, it's a black and white sheep. If it has anything that's not black, this is where the question comes in. If it's gray or kind of a brownish gray, then they call it lilac. I don't know who thought of lilac. That's what it's called. So you have a lilac or black and white. And those lilacs should breed true. It's recessive, so it should breed lilac to lilac. You get lilac. Once in a while, there's one that the genetics are, you kind of wonder, or it's kind of a different shade, and then you breed that one to a true lilac and you get black. Well, then the friends of mine, he's lucky to have this opportunity to pursue this in a legitimate scientific way. And hopefully at our meeting in the summer, our annual Jacob Sheep meeting, they'll have either some answers or at least update on it. And it's not like, hey, it doesn't really matter in the world, but we're all interested in it.
Sure, of course.
The colors, yes, there's lilac and there's black, and there's all those shades of, if they kind of gray out a little bit, or the lilac is a very light gray, or it's a more chocolatey color. So there's individual fleeces may look different.
Yeah. I saw a Jacob sheep judging Estes Park, and the person who was the judge had spent a lot of time in Oregon around. There was I guess there was a sort of a cluster of Jacobs there. And I noticed that there were several times where she said, "This is a lovely fleece. It is not it is not, doesn't meet the Jacob breed standard. So even though it's beautiful, and if you buy it, you will love it, it is too fine. This is not like conforming to the standards of what a real Jacob fleece should be. You'll love it, but it's not.
Yeah, well, and that is one thing. When we, in fact, as inspectors, the photos come through and we're supposed to look at them. And there's a few traits that you might think, oh, well, that looks like some crossbreeding, especially if it's one that has not it's an open flock book. So somebody can spotted a sheep and they think it's a Jacob, and either it came from a flock that they let go of the registrations, or it just came from who knows where, and they can submit it and we'll look at it and say, well, does that look Jacob enough to us or not? And then you start a registration number at a low level. And then as you breed up, hopefully you don't see some outlier that says, oh, wait, that one was not a true Jacob. So, but that's the thing is, within anybody's own flock, they might want to go finer or focus on horns or focus on one thing or another. When you register a ram, you're supposed to send in fleece samples. We don't ask for fleece samples for every sheep. That would be way too much. But for a ram, we do. And you get one, and sometimes we'll go and send those off for micron testing, because if it's too fine, I think, no, it's going outside what we expect for the breed. Yeah, I love the fleece, but don't sell it as a Jacob.
In addition to your sheep just being really photogenic, I think that you have lots of opportunities for people to appreciate and engage with them, whether it's just looking at your website or having a farm club or a CSA. Can you tell me a little bit about how your small group of sheep meets so many people?
Yes. Well, one thing I think is geography. I live halfway between San Francisco, Bay Area, and Sacramento, huge population centers. And then, of course, there's people further out from those centers. California, I grew up in California. I get to say I love it.
Yeah.
A lot of people, though, in some areas. And probably the farm club is the most unique thing that I have. I started it, 12 or 15 years ago now, maybe. It was the idea where people, like I'm at a show, at a fair or something, and people say, oh, I'd love to come out and get some experience. I can come out, I'll clean your barn for you. Well, you can't just have this random person show up and say, sure, go out to the barn, Or then I had this idea, well, when my kids were little, they had like adopt a whale or adopt a this or that, and you get all the information and you get to feel like you're part of this thing going on. Well, I could do that with a sheep. I think some people do that, offer that, but then like, well, what if that sheep dies or the fleece isn't very good? So I came up with Farm Club, which was a way for people to engage with the farm. It's kind of like a CSA, but not the typical, you get a box a month or whatever. It's a year membership. I send emails all the time. They get a behind the scenes look at the farm. Not all of them get out here that often, but there is the opportunity. I started with thinking, oh, we'll have 3 farm days a year when people are invited out. Well, it turns out it's many more than that. In fact, Sunday, we're going to vaccinate because it's like a few weeks prior to lambing. All the ewes need to be vaccinated. So farm day, people that want to can come out and help. And some people get more involved with the sheep. Some people just hold the clipboard. Depends on what level of interaction you want or what injuries you're dealing with at the time, how much involvement you have. And they all come out on shearing day or a lot and help with all the jobs on shearing day. When we start lambing, I invite farm club members to come out as long as they let me know, but come out any time and just hang out in the barn and watch and wait for lambs. And I'm emailing a lot about what's going on. So they get the feel of what's behind the scenes. They can sign up at different levels to get a fleece or to get yarn or to get meat, or there's a bunch of varieties, levels like that. But it's mainly the supporting. Some of them join because they like, the most of them are into fiber. A few are not, but most of them are into fiber. And they support a small local farm, and they can get experience with sheep. Some people know that they will never have sheep. Others think, well, when I retire, I really want to get a place and I want to have sheep, or do I? They can find out if they really do or not. So there's that. And then I also do some field trips. If I put it out there that I did field trips, I could spend every day doing a field trip, but I don't have every day to do a field trip. So there are people that know from previous years, and I'm talking like a lot of times the 3rd grade classes like to come, or a homeschool group. So we do that kind of thing too. That's just a one morning thing. So it's field trips, it's farm club, and me putting it out there online. And then I'm trying to be a weaver and through farm club, I teach classes too. So there's all these different things I'm doing. And when people come out for a class, we can always take a trip to the barn too, go look at people.
Yeah, of course. You mentioned, you said trying to be a weaver. I think you're succeeding at being a weaver. Oh. You've had several projects in Handwoven and Spinoff, and we just recently shared your Pinwheels cowl on our Instagram, and it's just a beautiful project.
Thanks. Yeah. No, I am a weaver, but it's finding time to be the weaver.
So do you mostly weave with your own wool, or is it a mix, or do you save your own wool for special occasions?
I do some of everything. There's another wool that I have here that I sell. There's a nearby farm called Tim Ranch, TIMM. It's the name of the owners. And they have a fine wool. They have a flock that was started with Rambouillet, Polypay, and Targhee sheep. And it's purely for meat production, but it's a really nice fine wool. And for the last maybe 8 years or so, I've been going to their shearing day, getting fleeces and having those spun into yarn, and then doing a lot of natural dyeing with that, because I get more yarn from them than I can from my own flock, because I do sell some fleeces, there's a limited number. And by the time you split up those fleeces into 3 colors, you don't have as much of everything. So I definitely I hoard some of my own when it comes back. So yes, I will weave with that. But I do a lot of blankets, and the thing I do best with my yarns and my wool is big rectangles, right? Isn't that the easiest thing in weaving? So that don't necessarily need any sewing. So blankets, shawls, that kind of thing. And I use the Tim Ranch. Often I'll use that Tim Ranch yarn for a long warp. And I have a AVL production loom. So on that, I can put a long warp for blankets. And then when I'm weaving blankets, I use some of my own wool, some more Tim Ranch wool that I've dyed with natural dyes, or other yarns also. And I spend a lot of time with those projects, but I get jealous. This is getting off track. I do a Zoom thing twice a month where it's a group of people that have questions. It's like a troubleshooting thing or something. And some of them will share photos from somewhere online. They spend a lot of time on Etsy or just somewhere online. And I put together a little slideshow so we can look at all the stuff without people trying to hold their things up to the camera. And we talk about problems people are having or questions about patterns or something. And then we just look at all this stuff. And anyway, I get jealous because I think, oh man, I'd really like to weave that. Oh, I'd like to try that one. We have done a few little explorations within our group, like, oh, let's everybody weave this, this craft or something. And there's so many gorgeous things out there that are more intricate that you could weave. This gets into, weaving stuff. You come across this gorgeous draft, but there's a 6-thread float. Well, if I'm weaving my wool at 8-inch per inch, maybe I don't want a 6-thread float. But if I was weaving with all these other fibers, it's like, ooh, that would be fun to do. So no, I do some other things, but primarily it's wool. I have a long, long list of all the other stuff that I want to weave.
Of course.
But we'll see.
So this group you mentioned, is that part of your farm club, or is it just a separate weaving?
Well, what I used to do, it's a separate group. It used to be, and it's not a specific, it's sort of there's some regulars, and it's not huge. It's like we could have 5 to 9 people on Zoom. Usually it's not more than a screen full of people.
Yeah.
But it started when pre-pandemic, I had a once a week Wednesday afternoon thing, and people would come here, like a drop-in thing, like a knit store will have. But a lot of the people, they got a lot better. They didn't really need the help anymore. And then the pandemic happened and it drifted off. And so then I started this online thing. And it's actually, we look forward to it because the people that do show up, there's one woman way back in Washington, D.C., and then the rest of us are all fairly local, but maybe 2 hours away. They're not going to get in their car and come here for an hour. And so, Yeah, it's on my website. It's called Wednesday Weavers. And it's just I don't have the links out on the web, but if somebody contacts me and wants to find out about it, I talk to them because it's small enough that it's just, I can email people.
Yeah. So it started around you as a sort of a teacher or coach, and it's kind of become a little bit more of a moderated community. Is that, I mean, I say moderated, but more like an actively led community kind of thing?
Kind of. No, what I try to do if I have time is if somebody has a question about a article in magazine, or, they have this project and or something doesn't make sense. Usually it's in a handwoven draft or something, or handweaving.net, or they ask me something about crackle, or, I'll try to do a little research and make it a lesson too, but I don't always have time to pursue that very far. That's on my list too. So that's what the group is. And it's, I'm trying to address everything that somebody has. It's a current question. And then we often just look at these other things people have contributed. And we do some not necessarily on a Wednesday, but as the spring comes up, we try to do 3 or 4 times where I offer to come out here and we do some dyeing because I have the whole place set up. I have enough space where everybody can come out and throw out a warp and dye it and do that. Now, obviously, the Zoom part could be for anybody anywhere, but the showing up for a dye day is probably a little more limited.
Yeah. The reason I'm so curious is that I think that everybody getting together once a month in a guild that's very regionally specific can be more difficult in times when people need to be away for work or can't devote a particular time like that. So I'm so curious about finding a format that works for people who are a little bit more spread out or who aren't in that. It's not the traditional guild structure. That's why I was curious.
Yeah. Well, you could say there are, most of the people have been there. They're kind of regulars, but they don't all come all the time. And it is a Wednesday afternoon. So like people with real jobs, although a lot of times that works for real jobs now, because if you're working from home and you can, have an hour anytime to talk on something else, you could do that. So
yeah. So you mentioned that, you something with six thread floats. What kind of yarn do you typically make? It sounds like the yarn you make are you trying to make yarn for both weaving and knitting or crochet?
I tell people that yarn is yarn. And if you want to weave it, you can weave it. And if you want to knit it, you can knit it. And the yarn that I have, the ones that I have made are just that Tim Ranch yarn and my own yarn. Everything else I get, I sell equipment from Ashford and Schacht, and Ashford produces yarn. And so I have some of theirs. But the yarn I have made is probably, it's, I guess when you're using the knitting words that everybody needs a label for, it's more like usually a sport or DK weight. And in the article I wrote more recently that was, I forget what the title, but it was like buying yarn from a farmer. That's essentially the gist of it. And actually the knitting Farm and Fiber Knits just picked that up and is using it too. But what I wrote in that article, part of it was about some of the things you think about when you're buying yarn that's not from just a big yarn store, where everything you get for several years is all the same and you know exactly what it's going to do. You buy a yarn on a cone or you buy the yarn in the skein. Okay, well, to answer your question specifically about, I guess, was more like,
what's the weight or what are the
yarn weight I'm using? Well, when I get that yarn on a cone, it looks so different from when I take the skein and just dip it in water and dry it and, it blooms. And there's been a discussion just recently about what blooming means, but it just looks like different yarn. But as a weaver or as a farmer who can sell to other people, knowing what that yarn is going to do is I know that yarn on the cone from experience, it's going to bloom enough that 8 ends per inch works for it. Whereas if you do the wraps and you come out, you might try to set it at 12, or I can set it 8 or 10. In fact, when I do a class, I usually have them set things a little bit closer because they all want to beat it too hard. The classes I do the classes I do are beginning weaving most, and it's really hard to beat lightly. And so I want it anyway. So the yarn I have made is I've used it, blankets, shawls, all that, those kinds of things. And it's when you get into talking about maybe fabric that you're going to, cut and make a jacket out of or something. And It's just different.
Yeah. It is difficult also for folks who are not as familiar with the weaving measurements, and it seems like cheating that things are different measurements based on the material. So an 8-2 wool is not like an 8-2 cotton. It's just very, very confusing. Is there even such a thing as an 8-2 wool? Not
I forget.
really.
No, there's a number. See, when you buy it, when I have mine made, it doesn't have any label like that at all. I try to figure out yards per pound.
Ah, yeah.
And then relate that to what a knitter thinks of in terms of is it, or all these other knitting words. But no, I always have a yards per pound. But that said, this is what the gist of that article was. Partly was that even when I get 1 year, I might get black yarn, white yarn, gray yarn, lilac yarn, those 4 yarns, all the same mill from the same time. But when I go, if she winds them all in a 200 yard skein and they all weigh a little different and you calculate yards per pound, well, the yards per pound are all a little bit different. But I know from my experience that they can all be used together and they're not dramatically different, but they're not exact. Like when you buy from a big yarn store, I mean, maybe in reality, those aren't really all exact yarns, but you think they are because that's what the label says.
Right. That's true. And I think that I'll share a link to the article, but I think that that's a challenge if you're trying to say, here's a pattern. If you do this, you will get this. When that meets, here's the special, unique experience. How do you put those together? You can't necessarily find something that's one of a kind and have it plug into something that's designed for something standard. So that's one of the challenges we wrestle with.
Well, that's one of the things we talk about in, say, my Wednesday Weavers group, or when I do a class, is that how wide can you veer off of something and still have a successful project? Because like I always show people in the beginning class, you may have like 3 fabrics or one warp, one set of samples, and it was at 15 ends per inch and 18 ends per inch and 24 ends per inch, same yarn, same warp. Hey, it all made cloth, right? So, and some people get so hung up on exactly, it's like I talk to people that have knitted using the example of knitting needles. It's like, well, you have this yarn and now do I use a size 6 or a size 8 or what, and you just get so stalled out, you don't ever get to it because you can't make a decision. And with weaving, what set do I use? It's sort of the same idea when you're starting. If somebody doesn't say, set it at 10, set it at 12, then you go ahead with it. But when you don't know, it's a reason that you never quite get to the project. I don't know. So we just talk about all those variables and that, hey, it is all going to make cloth. And if you're after a blanket, it's one thing if you're going to, I don't know, it depends on your project. That's the other thing. It's always, my answers for a lot of things are, it depends.
Yes.
You're making a blanket, a shawl, all those things. It's probably okay if it's not exactly what you thought,
Yeah, garments or things that need to drape are challenging. But, the solution to all of these things, which you haven't said, but it's to sample or swatch. But that's even more challenging to do, I think, if you're working with a one-of-a-kind yarn. Like if you only have 300 yards of something, it's pretty hard to convince yourself to cut some off and put it on a loom.
Yeah.
To see.
Yeah. So then it's just getting enough experience with maybe a yarn, maybe in your weaving history, you just find a yarn that you do learn, you spend some time playing with it and sampling with it so that then when you come to another yarn, it's not going to be the same one, but you might have a little more confidence that, there's the range, it'll be okay. Or you have to adjust your beat or stuff like that. That's the kind of thing we talk about in this Wednesday Weavers group because, and there's really, it's only a handful of people and they're mostly new people that learn to weave from me. So then they're the people that are still trying to decide what choices to make. I did an article on hemp a few years ago for the Yarn Lab as the hemp I also sell some of the hemp yarn. And the website talked about, I think it was 24 ends per inch. I can't remember now, but I think it said 24 ends per inch is the way you'd use this yarn. No way could I get a balanced weave out of 24 ends per inch. So that was the gist of that Yarn Lab article was the different choices and trying it. But that's the thing. If you have the luxury of time and fiber to play with it. And that's how you learn to be a weaver, I think, is just or you put on a little bit extra on a warp. And then when you're finished with the project, you either do it at the beginning or you do your project and then you have that little bit of extra and you weave something else through it and just see what happens. And that's how you learn.
So did you set out to be a retailer as well, to sell looms and yarn, or did that sort of happen by accident?
Never had a plan. And now as a farmer, I see there's a lot of kind of workshop things out there for beginning farmers, or they're trying to promote, a lot of farmers are getting old and trying to help people along. And I don't know how many people actually go to stuff like that, but yeah, I didn't have a plan. I started teaching people. And then we were out here where the farm we have now, it seemed silly to teach somebody something and then send them off to go buy that somewhere else. So that's when I started to sell equipment from a couple of wholesalers, some of the main people. And yeah, and now I'm actually find myself wondering which of these things do I cut back on? Or do I? Maybe I don't. I just keep going. One thing that adds a lot to the time, though, I think, well, it's great that we have it. On the other hand, it's all the social media. If you don't do it now, nobody knows you exist, right? You have to do it. Oh, and in the old days, now I'm going to really sound like an old person. In the old days, conference where there was Convergence, there was local, like our conference out here, the Northern California group. When you have that conference once a year, it's like, that's a big deal. We get to all go see all the stuff and you get to buy things and have classes and stuff. Well, hey, that stuff's all over the place now. It's online. And I'm jealous of those people that have online schools, and some of them are really good. And yeah, I've done stuff. In fact, when the pandemic started, I tried to offer my Learn to Weave, a couple of classes that I did online. But the thing that people like about my classes, I think, is the personal help and looking over your shoulder type of thing. It's the basic stuff, like when you're first learning to weave. Everybody needs a lot of hands-on help with that at the start. And it's hard to do that online. And I set it up so that we had this online thing, and I took pictures of all my samples that I show and we talked about them. But then I'd have a couple of Zoom classes where, yeah, I can look over your shoulder or you can look at me. And I'm really glad I'm not doing that now. that whole thing. Yeah. There are some people that are doing some online stuff that's really good, but I got off track. What was I talking about? Oh, just, the social media aspect of being in business, because it's you have a website, but then you just got to keep promoting everywhere, right. Instagram, all this stuff. And fortunately, I like taking photos. If you don't like taking photos, well, that leaves you out of a lot of it. I like doing photos but the time, it's just the time. How much time do you devote to that? Like, yeah, I don't have a social media person.
How many in-person events do you do at this point?
Well, the classes it's hard to say. I had several that just in January, I had a whole bunch of people that wanted to learn to spin all of a sudden. So I did, I think, 3. And well, how many people are in this class? Well, 5 or 6 is probably all I can handle, space-wise and attention-wise. I can't even put a number on how many classes I do. But as far as events, there is our local fiber festival is Lambtown in October. And I do that. I'm 10 minutes from there. Why would I not do that? Nice. Yeah. The people that are in charge are involved in the farm club, and I'm friends with them. So I do that one.
But you are really focusing on education over, say, retail, or, you're not necessarily going and having just a shopping booth at a festival.
Right. In fact, Lambtown is where I do have a booth. It's close. The booth part, it's just so much work. And the conference that's coming up last year and this year, the Northern California one, I thought, hey, if I can get a full class, if you're doing it purely from a financial standpoint, well, if I can get paid to teach a class and I get my hotel and all that stuff, that's cool. Because when you go to sell, you pay your booth fee, you pay, and the work now, I'm not getting any younger. I'm bringing all the, the booth setup. You got the grid wall, all the stuff. And my stuff is so varied. It's like, I would not even be bringing all the equipment, the retail looms and all that kind of stuff, or looking at the fiber, the things that I'm producing that are more unique. And right now we have an issue with mills being so far behind. Like, I still have my Tim Ranch wool from 2024 at a mill, and they're going to shut down. So I got to pick it up and send that, and the one where they're shearing in March, send those two to a mill, and that'll be 4 to 6 months out. So it's not like, I get my, we shear and now I'm going to have new yarn to sell. That yarn isn't going to be available till the end of the year if I'm lucky. Mm-hmm. So anyway, simple answer to that is, at this point, it's easier to go and teach a class if I can get a full class than to the booth. And I'm publicizing myself. And
it's interesting that now I can't say that what I'm aware of is necessarily the same as what everybody else is aware of. But given that you have a small number of sheep and a deliberately contained retail presence, I still think it's pretty remarkable that people all over the country have heard of Meridian Jacob. People who may never get to be part of your farm club in person. So I think that that's really appealing that you have these, sweet Jacob sheep who have such a personality, that they're doing these outreach. And of course, you're doing the design. I mean, we talked about classes, but, I don't think I've talked enough about your design work. But
well, I appreciate you saying, it does seem like people have heard of me, and I kind of keep thinking, I mean, there's other people that I know of that are the big names in weaving. And I think, I don't really fit in with those, but I guess people have heard of me, maybe because, lately I have been doing more articles. I look sometimes when that thing comes out about, do you want to be in this issue? I think, wait, what could I do? And then I'm trying to come to my senses and think, wait a minute, that's another deadline. Just let that one go.
Mm-hmm. Where did the name Meridian Jacobs come from? I mean, the Jacobs, I know. Where did the Meridian come from?
Because we live on North Meridian Road. And it seems kind of like I don't know. Yeah, we live on Meridian Road. And actually, I'm not a geographer or a map person or anything, but you know how if you are into maps, the meridian is where things start when you start counting over miles or acres or whatever count, or time, or meridian is a north-south line, right? And when I go walking across the road, if I go for a walk, or you go pretty much anywhere in our area, you see Mount Diablo over there to the south. And that's the meridian runs right through Mount Diablo. And it's kind of given me new respect, or just thinking, when I think of Meridian Road, it's like, it's a real thing, that it's the Meridian. I'm pretty sure that it is. Mm-hmm. So anyway, that's where the name came from, though. Yeah, if I were to do it all over and, go to one of these classes about running a business, I don't know if I would have chosen that name. And I also probably would have done something different for a logo. I had somebody do the logo and it looked, that's good. But my logo is a picture of, it's the Jacob sheep. It's a four-horn Jacob ram, just the head. And two things about it. One is that it's vertical because it's tall horns. And so that doesn't fit on things as well. Like website, it's like, wait, then I have all that space that doesn't work. And I probably should have sent it out on Facebook to a zillion people that don't know me and say, what is this? Because half the people think it's a rabbit.
I could see goat, but rabbit, that would be,
Well, I think they think those are ears, because once you've seen one and you know what I do and you look at it, you realize, no, it's a ram.
Right.
But people think it's a rabbit. So another one of those little things about it. Hey, everybody, if you're starting a business, do a little research.
I don't know how many folks who are in fiber businesses set out to say, I'm going to start a business. I think it's a fairly small number, and people probably.
Yeah. Well, and that's, like I said, this whole thing just evolved without a plan. And here I am.
Yeah. But the Jacob sheep were, you said, you looked at them and you said, those are the ones I want.
Well, I try to remember when my friend, her name was Robin Fouquet. We were both very involved in the Sacramento Weavers Guild. People got us mixed up because we were both Robin, same age, all that. she was selling, she had to Jacobs, and I think she had 3 breeds, maybe Romney and something else. I don't remember what she had. But when she was going to be moving and selling her sheep, I mean, I'm not sure I had thought, oh, gee, I really want to get Jacob sheep someday. But when she was going to sell, I thought, oh, okay, I need those sheep.
Yeah. Yeah, it seems like sometimes the sheep choose the shepherd. You're like, that's my sheep.
Well, and I had a few sheep before that, because when we were at the dairy, I did have a handful of sheep who she ended up going to a friend's house eventually. One thing that was different that I noticed, one thing about these so-called heritage breeds is that sometimes there's traits that you don't know. Like if you choose to breed based on phenotype, like, oh, I want wool like this, or I want, something or another. This is the worry that you breed out, you lose other traits, well, like excellent mothering ability, sheep that can count to 3, and one of those things is I never have a foot rot issue with the Jacob sheep. And they're in the same environment as everybody else. And it's not like I make them stand in water all the time. But the other sheep I had, they had foot rot off and on. And I've never had that in Jacob sheep. So,
yeah. So the spot shows the sheep too.
Yeah.
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 You're in this wonderful spot for celebrating natural fiber, I think, because wasn't the fiber shed movement started not too far from you?
Yes. We feel like we've always thought that this, our Northern California group, it's kind of like we're part of the mothership. 2 counties over, Fiber Shed, Rebecca Burgess started Fiber Shed. And without really planning it to get the way it to as big as it was, I don't think. And I have a picture somewhere. They came out and she bought yarn from me and one of her 1-year garments. The first when she started, she had garments that she was going to wear that year that were all locally sourced. And she bought yarn from me. And so I was involved in it ever since. And it eventually became a nonprofit. I mean, I remember sitting here in our kitchen with a group of people when we were trying to figure out, well, wait, now it's a nonprofit. So now we producers can't sell online the way we did when it was just through somebody's personal checkbook if we wanted to be called Fiber Shed. So anyway, we had to start thinking. We started a co-op for that group. Anyway, it's grown much since then, and that there's affiliates all over the country. But yeah, I was involved from the beginning, and I don't feel like I'm involved now other than following those practices, which is to work with your land and your fiber as sustainably as possible. And we do that. We graze our pasture using, people used to call it rotational grazing, but it's really kind of intensive grazing management where you'll graze one section for a little bit and then you move into the next and so on. And that way even though we have 10 acres and we're only grazing 6.5 of it, that's irrigated. That's another thing. We live in the Sacramento Valley. And if we didn't irrigate, it would be brown all summer because we don't have summer rain. So it's irrigated pasture, but when you can move them from place to place, strip to strip, then each of those places you're not grazing right for those 3 days gets, say, maybe 30 days of rest. And hopefully that keeps the plant composition better. Anyway, there's just all kinds of things that go into raising an animal. And if you have 2 or 3 sheep, you can go buy hay all the time, but we're trying to do it where we're grazing them. And there's just a lot to that.
Yeah. It's really exciting to have sheep and fiber be part of something that benefits the environment and the landscape.
Well, that's, people think about food, and there's the slow food movement and eat local and all, but they don't realize that if you apply those same principles to textiles, it opens up a huge thing, a huge world that most people don't even think about. It's the difference now between the slow fashion and fast fashion. I mean, more people are becoming knowledgeable about it, but, the amount of plastics in the ocean and all this stuff that is really important when you factor in what each of us could do as not only a textile or a fiber producer, but as a consumer. I mean, everybody is a consumer and we can all have an impact that way. And it's worth getting to know those things. And that's kind of what Fiber Shed promote, is trying to promote awareness of all that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. So for folks who aren't necessarily able to get to your farm themselves, how can people learn more from you and find your yarn and just generally learn more about Meridian Jacobs?
Well, I do have a website. Problem is, I don't have everything on the website that I have here because I just don't have time to get it on the site. I do presentations for guilds, and I think I have a couple of them listed on my website, but I may have to update that. But some guilds, fiber guilds, like to hear about Jacob sheep, what it's like to have a small business, pretty much all the stuff we've been talking about, having a business and what the sheep are like. And yeah, that's the thing I can talk most easily about. I don't even remember what I have listed right now, but I can pretty much talk for quite a while about sheep and about yarn and fiber and producing it, what it's like to have a small business. And I could branch off on other topics if there's something I have. So there are a few things that I will teach as a workshop, especially if I were to go somewhere for a guild meeting and then have a 2 or 3 day workshop with it. We do V-shawl. I've done clasped warp. That was pretty new. In fact, I taught that at Convergence on the rigid heddle loom, but one of the recent articles was on doing clasped warp on a floor loom.
Mm-hmm.
Taking advantage of how the patterns change as you change the warp. Mm-hmm. And that's one I would like to develop for a class. So there are a few things like that.
That is such a cool look, the clasped warp. And I learned so much from your article in Little Looms and then your article in Handwoven. I thought, I think it would help if somebody showed me how to do this in person. So maybe I will get to see you teach a class on that someday.
Well, I can vision. I just haven't done it here yet. I've done a lot of them on the rigid heddle. That's a simple half-day class to get the warping done. And then whether people stay weave it or not, it's different. But it's a little trickier and more to think about doing it on the floor loom, but it's fun. And I think it would be fun to present that as a guild class, somewhere especially where people can bring their looms more easily. I am available, not during lambing. It's certain times of the year I don't try to make a commitment, but most times of the year I could make a commitment to come in to your group.
I think it's also, I love being able to learn more about weaving with wool. I think that we've gotten to be so cotton focused in weaving that having somebody who is really a specialist in weaving with wool, I think that's very cool.
Oh, well, so maybe I need to have another class on weaving with wool. Because,
sorry to give you another project, Rob.
But it is what I feel most confident with because I have a lot of experience. So I should say, I'll do that.
Well, I know you've got a lot to do. So especially with lambing coming up soon. And I will include a link to our show notes because I have a feeling that when you can get away from the barn and post and hit upload, that there'll be some pretty darn cute lamb pictures. Can't wait to see those.
Yeah. I try to I try to keep posting or start posting right away. So YouTube, there's another thing. Go look at YouTube. I used to do a fair amount on YouTube and there's a big gap. And now I started doing some more, but like last lambing, right at the first week of lambing, I had some lambing videos up there and then I didn't do anything for the rest of the year, pretty much. But I do have videos short. It's one thing to sit down to a video and the person wants to, I try to make them pretty succinct. Right. Mm-hmm. So I just put up some shearing videos and I will be definitely doing some more lambing videos because I just think it's interesting. And I always try to, I use that partly, it's not only I teach beginning weavers, but when you sell a sheep to somebody who's never had sheep before, you're sort of in a position of teaching shepherds. And people always have a question, well, how long should this take? Or what if it looks like this, when they're lambing? Well, that's the reason I did the videos the way I did them is because if you say, okay, here's this sheep out there, she looks like she's in labor, and here's the time. And then, 5 hours later, here we are. I think the sheep is still in labor. And as the thing progresses, and I try to say, oh, well, here it was like, what's normal? Okay, it took 10 minutes from this stage to this stage. And so I try to make my videos, and they're not 5-hour lambing videos, they're 3 to 5 minutes, that information on them about how long it took. And then, well, hey, here's the lambs. How long did it take before they started nursing? Well, Jacob's sheep, they're 10, 15 minutes. They're up and trying to nurse. So that's the kind of thing that from the videos you could get.
Yeah. Great. Well, Robin, thank you so much.
Well, thank you. It's been fun. And I can always talk about weaving and sheep and wool. And I can keep talking.
Love it. Well, we always love to hear about it. So thanks. Have a great day.
So much. Thank you.
Thanks to our sponsors for supporting the podcast. Thank you for listening to the Long Thread Podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, please rate the show and leave us a comment on Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcast platform. Thanks again.